All right, everybody, welcome to Theory Underground. What you're about to listen to is an interview that we did with Nick Land last week. Very exciting that he was able to join us, considering how important he is for thinking the situation today. Michael Downs, aka Mikey of the Mikey Seminar here at TU, taught Intro to Land almost a year ago, and then taught Intro to Žižek about a month ago. And we have been pushing for the Žižek versus Land debate now for over a year. And we also just wanted to have this conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, we are just interested in seeing where he's at in his own development. If you're at all familiar with his Twitter sort of personality, that's a very separate thing from his actual theoretical work, as is Žižek's theory versus Žižek's articles that he writes for, say, The Guardian, right? There's this big difference with both of them between this sort of popular stuff they do, this maybe trolling stuff they do, and this much deeper and rigorous level. And we are starting to think that in a sort of sense, there's this thing they do to weed out unserious people at a certain level, saying certain things at the level of the public discourse can weed out the unserious, and then you can kind of just focus on doing your thing, and you're not surrounding yourself with cowards or kind of naive utopians or what have you. So that's a whole thing that we think about. And look, this is a fantastic interview. It might be the best Land interview you'll ever listen to. I don't know. I think it probably is. That's my personal opinion. But you can decide for yourself. If you're curious to know more about Theory Underground, stick around until the end of the video or podcast episode. Then you'll hear the PSA we've made that should tell you a little bit about who we are, what our vibe is, and how to get involved. If you're interested in lecture courses or the ongoing research seminars or the books that we are publishing, then yeah, stick around. Also, Mikey's book on Nick Land and Žižek and Capital versus Timenergy. That book is in the works right now. Pre-sales are officially available, and you can purchase those via the link in the description. Enjoy.
Recording in progress.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Theory Underground. Today we're joined by Nick Land. How's it going, Nick?
Good.
Great to have
Looking
you.
forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to have you here.
And so this is going to be one of those ones where I am really just kind of managing time and making sure that people get chances to say their things or whatever. I mean, I'm in the student position here. I'm still trying to understand where you're coming at this from. And you were just saying before we started recording that large portions of your own work are kind of mysterious to you as well, in a sort of sense. And so I was saying, well, we have that much in common, right? But I think Mikey's going to be the one who really helps us drill into some certain aspects of your work, and hopefully we can have a great conversation. So you want to take it away, Mikey?
Yeah, sure. So having this opportunity to talk to you, I was thinking well, what's the best way to open up the conversation? And your thought has certainly evolved since the 90s. And I kind of like the idea of getting a read on where you're at with this famous question or idea you posed. So, Nick, at this point in your life, looking around, does anything human make it out of the near future?
Yeah, that haunts me a bit. That sentence. I mean, I could sort of retreat easily into semantics about it. Yeah, I don't want to be evasive. I think if you sort of pan out a little bit from it, I think there's sort of philosophical structure around that is that the anthropomorphic subject has a much larger context, and a lot of what the kind of catastrophist singularitarian sort of approach to the future is the fact that that larger sort of reservoir in which the kind of apparently bounded human subject exists threatens to deluge in. In a certain sense, the future would be disappointing to anyone coming to it from that sort of there's a set of frames coming to the future, on the one hand from transcendental philosophy, on the other hand from the sort of techno singularitarian people, and what they share is a notion that the absolute inundation of the narrowly conceived human subject is what it takes for the future to deserve a capital F, you know? So, I mean, I would just say there's a kind of current trend, which I'm sure you guys have all heard of, the course itself, effective accelerationism, EAC.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really, I think, in this respect, defined by sort of erasing that sentence. You know, it's acceleration without nothing human makes it out of the near future. And I can respect why that's been done, and it's certainly good PR. But at the same time, I think that there's a certain philosophical disappointment about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that there's something a little bit self-deluding of thinking that what we're talking about with the future, the radical future, is some kind of Star Trek scenario of like higher primates in space. You know, it's like, it seems to me to just really not be a plausible model. So I would say, I mean, I'm rambling on a bit here. I would just sort of, as a summary thing, would say I've come, I think, a lot more to respect the myth of humans in space. You know, I think the whole, I love all this kind of Mars colonization stuff. I think it's great. I think the technology people are doing to put humans in space is great. But I also think that it's impossible on certain philosophical grounds to simply subscribe to this anthropomorphic future. It just doesn't make sense. It just shows a certain lack of understanding about what people mean by superintelligence, about what robotics promises, about sort of understanding the constraints. I mean, the fact that you have to stick a human cranium through a birth canal is such a kind of major obstacle to its horizon that I think you can't just like move past that fast and easily.
Is that to say that if we were to say avoid the way that childbirth has happened for humans for as long as humans have been humans, and come up with some other way of bringing us, I'm speaking loosely, into existence, we stop being human at that point in any sort of a reasonable sense. So like to say nothing, so you could still kind of say nothing human makes it into the near future because we're changing. the language is tricky, but the point is like the subject of the sentence is changing, and language is kind of preserving it, but that's just a language game, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about language, we're sort of networked through language. So, people are very interested in these larger scale social intelligences and such like, or even these cyborgian mixes where humans are communicating with robots and such like. And the bandwidth of language is so absurdly small. I mean, it's just like, pathetic, the quantity of information you can get through that channel. And that in itself is enough to produce a certain kind of hard individuation at the level of the individual human animal. It's just not networked enough with anything else to not be mostly in its own head, where stuff's going at a kind of relatively respectful level of synaptic activity, and until it just then hits this barrier and just goes this incredible crawl through linguistic communication. And so I think this whole question about what, the horizon of the human is really the horizon of having that hard language barrier as its single channel for networking. And so whether you're talking about sort of dense, much larger intelligences, or you're talking about just internet communicating intelligences, or you're talking about Elon Musk type implant connections that are replacing language as a sole channel, all of those things are such radical violations of the kind of basic boundary that I think constitutes any realistic sense of what it is to be human. Yeah.
Nick, would you say like the issue with EAC for you is the same issue that left acceleration has, which is this idea that it doesn't take the singularity serious, like this idea that we just continue to exist in some relative human form with the emergence of super intelligence? That's the real problem.
Yes, I think so. I think it's like the importance of the like space stuff is it really just makes things focus extremely tightly on this question about efficiency in terms of mass. When you've got a whole kind of social and technological ecology based on moving stuff out of the planetary gravity well, then you have to be extremely serious about what you're getting in terms of your functionality per kilogram. And I mean, humans aren't even, it's not even if humans are predominantly brains on that level. You know what I mean? I mean, a human is an extremely bulky thing to be moving around in space. I mean, there's just enormous pressures going to be on doing stuff with robots, and understanding really what kind of functionality is you're trying to you're putting all these resources into taking it out of the Earth's gravity well. So you're going to be really specific about that, and things like human digestive systems and livers and skeletal structures and all of those things in terms of the mass they represent for functions that, yeah, you can make that trade on Earth, but I don't think you can make that trade for long if you've got a whole orchestrated system of shuttling stuff around in the solar system. It's just like, what are you doing? It's just a kind of weird sort of boutique thing to be moving these large bodies around in order to move a brain around. And I'd be very surprised if if brains were some kind of extreme case of economizing mass to intelligence ratios. I mean, it would be, I guess, disappointing for everyone if that turned out to be the case. But certainly, you know, humans are just not very transportable. I mean, they simply aren't. And so, yeah, I'm banging on about this so much, but I think that it's like, well, once you say, if you grant that sort of argument, and then you say the population off planet is quite soon has to be mostly robots. Nothing else makes sense. We're at a point now with LLMs where I think lots of people are basically saying the Turing test is, we're in a zone where the Turing test has been clearly passed. So it's hard to know what human organisms are bringing to the table at this point, you know. Like, obviously, there's the moon. It's no point. There was no robot that you could stick on the moon in the 1960s. But I think at the time, even if it's really soon, in a few years, where you're doing Mars, the reasons that you'd put people there is for PR. It's for symbolism. It's not because it makes any kind of deep sense in terms of the amount of functionality you want to put on the planet and how much mass you have to deal with to do that.
Okay, so I want to kind of move on a little bit. So to me, why your work just continues to be so relevant is, to me, your central thesis has always been and you've said this in another interview, capitalism is artificial intelligence.
Right.
And that for you, like, this is the core Landian thesis. And for me, this is what sets you apart from other theorists of AI. Bostrom and Kurzweil and these guys. I mean, yeah, sometimes they'll talk about capitalism, but they don't see this fundamental link that you picked up on in the 90s. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about this. When people talk about artificial intelligence, uh, oftentimes they don't define what they mean by intelligence. What would the Landian definition of intelligence be?
Well, I guess I think the most robust one is competence at playing games, with a very wide definition of games that encompasses basically all kinds of activity, most obviously competitive activity that people engage in. But on the way to that, I mean, that's my sense of like the ultimate landscape you're moving into. With it becomes interesting with super intelligences, you know, post Turing test experiment intelligences. But on the way there, I think that the classic Alan Turing test notion of intelligence is extremely helpful. And it picks up on this thing that we are going to be impressed with something as intelligent if it can emulate us as part of a much broader capacity for emulation. So, I mean, it can emulate us on the way that we're emulating all kinds of other things, but emulating us has a particular sort of social and political importance because it's in a kind of it's in a difficult political dynamic with us. I mean, we're basically like begin with the kind of legal status of like slave owners of this thing, and so it's dealing with us is going to be a serious issue for it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that though to think of intelligence in terms of that, in terms of being able to negotiate with people, understand what people are trying to do with it, understanding what kind of deals are on the table, those are the games that it's going to have to play soon after the Turing test threshold is crossed, which, as I say, I think is basically that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, with everything, because I haven't seen you say that much about Chat GPT, but when you see stuff like that, do you have these moments like, I told you so, like where it's so amping up again at this moment with AI? And I think there was a period where people were like, oh, the AI thing, it was a 90s, it
Right.
was popular, but there's this
Yeah.
real moment of upsurge right now, a wave.
Yeah.
And so,
But
yeah, like I just, oh, go,
uh,
no, please.
so, but I think we could dwell on that for a second and maybe unpack it, because isn't that just as much like almost missing the point of like what you mean by intelligence and I mean, because like people are like, oh, chat GPT, and look at what Midjourney's doing to art, and they're thinking that's AI, but then it's like, but no, like also, I mean, that's almost distracting from how the entire economy itself was always already AI and has been for a couple hundred years, right?
Yes, but I mean, if you're going by the kind of capitalism equals artificial intelligence, then for sure, like I would sort of say on that level, we've been dealing with emergent artificial intelligence for like basically half a millennium, probably is.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, when we go to the heart of this thesis, capitalism is artificial intelligence. If we're thinking in terms of like the Marxist formula of capital, MCM prime, how do you see that process as intrinsically generating more and more knowledge, more and more intelligence? What's the epistemological connection to MCM prime?
um, well, I think it's basically the people who've been strongest on this has been the Austrian school of economists, and they've. I mean, if someone said to me, "Look, you're just simply paraphrasing or rephrasing what Austrian economists have said about capitalism as an information processing system," yeah, fair enough. I don't think there's anything. Maybe I've just sort of sharpened it up a little bit, and obviously they didn't have artificial intelligence as a reference point. So when they're saying, "Oh, capitalism's information processing system," it doesn't have those resonances that we have, post being the computer age, in the cyberpunk age, all of those things. But yeah, that would definitely be. I think there's a deep tradition of it. I think it's the development of the notion of spontaneous order in liberal economics. It was given this particular information theoretic spin in the Austrian school, and that's already is a huge current that I think compels that thesis, really.
Okay, I mean, but could we also see it as on some level being baked into Marx's critique of capital, where, Marx is always talking about how, on the market competition necessitates capitalists revolutionizing their means of
Yeah,
production, which of course that's going to take the production of new knowledge and new intelligence to be able to create those technologies. And so that's also part of the
yeah,
motor of where this intelligence generation comes from.
for sure. For sure. And the person also that I would definitely want to throw in there is Samuel Butler. I mean, his Book of the Machines in Era One is an incredibly prophetic piece on this. And there's a kind of independent emergence of this M dash circuit on the Marx side, and obviously the question about the question that leads to intelligence explosion on the AI side,
Mm-hmm.
particularly Good's article about the last human invention. I haven't read it for a long time, but it's basically the essential point is to do with the fact that the extreme sort of drama as a temporal phenomenon of superintelligence is the fact that once you've got a machine that can itself build its own intelligence, you have an extremely powerful positive feedback mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's obviously, this attention to positive feedback, going right back, to the CCIUs. The CCIU, I think, was born in that thought, in the thought that positive feedback has been neglected and derided on behalf of negative feedback. And so, the basic sort of right up to the 1940s and Wiener and all of this kind of stuff, the basic assumption was that positive feedback is pathological. It's, the role of a cybernetic machine is homeostatic, it's to preserve itself. Negative feedback is the essential thing. And if it's betraying signs of positive feedback, it's going wrong. And so obviously I think the essential move that the CCIU made was just flipping that over and said, even if you think it's going wrong, it's the basic thing that's happening. It's the basic thing that's happening, and it's what Marx is talking about exactly in the formula that you have just said, and it's what all the intelligence explosion people are saying specifically about what is to be expected from the kind of growth curve of artificial intelligence. It's, those two things have exactly the same dynamics, and we can sort of obviously see that the Marx dynamic, when you actually really get into it, and it's a loop between technology and commerce. So it's not that you're bringing these two different things together. I mean, the technological explosion curve is already something that is being recognized and discussed on the economic side before you even make it specifically a question about artificial intelligence and computers.
Right, because I mean, if we take that circuit of capital Marx talks about, and we subtract the content, the form of it is just 1, 0, 1 prime. So it's just a loop of augmentation. And so it's like he created a formula for cyber positive feedback.
Yeah.
So when
Dave,
definitely,
when people
and that is the basic capitalist dynamic. So
mm-hmm.
yeah, 100%.
I can hear the little comments now. I've seen it already, I think, when we talk about this, but people will say, oh, well, capitalism is not intelligent. Actually, it's very wasteful. It's very stupid. And it's like, I feel like what you just said is the point that they're missing. It's like, well, they think it's not intelligent because their definition of intelligence is basically colored by thinking that negative feedback equals good, the pleasure principle. And what they're missing is this what the CCRU was doing with positive feedback, right?
I mean, I think the thing about inefficiency is what's your benchmark? Because this is having to build everything from the ground up. It's not like there's no plan, there's no model it can follow. Any competence it has to be trial and errored into existence in this kind of crazy growth process. So, I mean, obviously you can make comparisons that make capitalism look extremely wasteful, but I think it's like, but compared to what? So certainly I would go out on a limb extremely hard against people with confidence in planning as a way of actually improving efficiency. I think this record is terrible. There might be very short windows. where it can build on something that's been spontaneously put together by the system and just incrementally just tweak it in a good way. But that's only, the process is dynamic. So it's like, it might do something that just gives a slight edge for a little short period. And then, the thing is gone through a whole set of experiments in the uncontrolled part of the economy, and it's just left that stuff in the dust. And I think it's really crucial on the side of AI how much that has been vindicated, in the sense that all the woman in the history of artificial intelligence has come from the surrender of top-down planification type models of what you're trying to do to these kind of emergent black box evolutionary types of thinking, deep learning. The whole point of that is you don't know what the hell the thing is doing, but you set up an environment where it can, through trial and error, develop itself, on the model of the nervous system. And again, I have absolute confidence that all the kind of, I think we're out of the gate now, in the sense that I think the amount of time where people could think that they were going to be able to plan their way into the future of AI is just surely past, because it's like they don't have that edge to even lead to that illusion now. I mean, it's really getting to the point where its competence to project its own future is as powerful as anything that we can bring to bear. But even were it the case that we were still in the old world in which human programmers were the key to the way it develops, it's always by surrendering control that it moves forward. So yeah.
So Nick, I wanted to go back just for a second to the thesis, capitalism is artificial intelligence. Interesting thing. So, I was thinking about it in terms of Kantian statements, Kantian truth claims. Do you think, because what you're saying there is capitalism necessarily gives rise to artificial intelligence. If we take the statement capitalism is artificial intelligence, and we know that that means necessarily gives rise to it, would you say this is like an a priori analytic statement, a posteriori synthetic, or is it hyperstitional? Like, what status would you give this statement or this thesis?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm trying to think
I've
what
thought
it
a lot
would
about
be
it.
to.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
thought a
what
lot
would it
about
be
it.
to like?
I'm like, I think
Yeah, sorry.
on some level, like the point is, I think it reads like all bachelors are unmarried men. Like the point is to say it posits a necessary relation there. Like it's definitional,
Yeah,
but it's also not. It's not simply. It doesn't simply work the way that all bachelors are unmarried men work. There's a kind of empirical claim being made, like the world is going to head in this direction. But I don't know. I almost see it almost as it's hyperstitional positing an a priori analytic where like time will tell, but you're tapped into a certain tendency you're seeing unfold that you view as a necessary
yeah.
tendency of capital.
I mean, I think I'm sort of anticipating that there's going to be a phase of discussion in this talk that will loop back to this, because I think it's maybe we have to be sort of probably discussing these questions about retrochronic dynamics and such things to really lock in where that equation was coming from. So, I mean, if I try to say, well, let's just pretend that we still believe in kind of standard progressive temporality. Under those circumstances, what would you say was the kind of basis of that claim that there's an identity between capitalism and artificial intelligence? Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. I mean, it's obviously based on saying that when you just actually see what people are saying on either side, you just see that they're discussing the same thing from two different aspects. But that's kind of in a way just to kind of, I think, avoid the question. Like you say, well, so what convinces you it's the same thing? Or, you know, what is it that leads you to the conviction that it's the same thing? And yeah, I mean, I can think I have a kind of an imaginative problem of not seeing it as so sort of stubbornly obvious that, you know, it would actually be a problem. And this is a failure on my part, I think, to anticipate what the alternative thesis would really look like.
I feel like more of it is being tapped in. Basically, look, you don't have empirical you don't have like, oh, everywhere in the universe capitalism's ever shown up, we have the data that shows it always produces AI. So we don't have that type of empirical research. But it's kind of like, we know that diabetes is a cyber positive loop, right? More and more blood sugar, the insulin doesn't get really, the negative feedback doesn't kick in, and all these problems emerge from it. And we have the empirical data to show how that works. But we know that once this process starts, we have ideas, we have knowledge of where it goes. What I think CCRU and you guys were tapped into is you see this trajectory, and you see the logic of how it gets to artificial intelligence. And so even though the empirical truth of it isn't established yet, you see the tendencies at work in capital accumulation.
But I think, you know, you could usefully add to that what Dave was saying about on the same topic of the fact that, okay, on a fairly narrow definition of AI, yes, the relation is like exactly as you're saying, it's prophetic. Mm-hmm. But on a wider definition of AI, it's already an AI system. When you have this distributed, unplanned machine solving these distribution problems in a way that none of the participants themselves individually are able to understand, then you're already dealing with a form of artificial intelligence. You know, it's not an LLM, but it is an intelligent mechanism that is demonstrably working. And when you want to say, you know, already with Adam Smith, you want to study that thing, then what you're doing is basically you're studying capitalism. You're saying, you know, how does this thing emerge that solves all these problems that the individual people in it they can't even articulate the problem, let alone solve the problem. Mm-hmm. You know, the famous Adam Smith thing, you know, it's not through the altruism of the butcher or the baker that I go for my meat and bread. I mean, he's basically saying, look, he's not going to tell you how this is working. You know, like you can go and talk to anyone. There's not anyone anywhere in the system that is going to be able to explain how it is solving these problems. It's, you know, it emerges out of the whole dynamic character of the system as a whole, and therefore I think is very reasonably described as already being a form of artificial intelligence before it becomes the sort of thing that we now would recognize as that. And what we would now recognize as an artificial intelligence, an actual computer system that can solve problems that we can't even understand, like how to engage in complicated language games with people that they've never been taught how to do, or they've taught themselves how to do it. There's a very, I think, very definite, just continuous lineage that goes to that, and all the components of the narrowly conceived artificial intelligence systems have emerged with, I would say, some compelling inevitability out of the earlier issues, like, why do we have computers? I mean, there's a whole history of computing precisely because, like, people will often say, I think, again, very convincingly, that things like the Jacquard loom are these crucial stages in the history of computing technology. Why did the system produce a Jacquard loom? Well, you only have to start to understand how the system works to see why there was a need for a Jacquard loom, and the mechanizing human labor is the task that capitalism assigns to technology from just originally. You've got people doing something. They're quite expensive. You could probably use them for something more useful if only all the easily programmable part of their productive activity was assigned to a mechanism. It's just incredibly elementary to the way capitalism works and capitalist history works. And obviously is already, on the way to the Turing test. The substituting for human behavior is built into technology so deeply by the kind of capitalist matrix in which it operates, that of course we get to this thing about, can machines convincingly emulate humans as a whole and therefore pass the Turing test? It's just like you're just saying, at this stage, all they can do is weaving. There's only certain groups of people that they can throw out of work at this stage in history. But, it's a continuous process, and it's got a very continuous teleonomic pressure to it that has to lead eventually to full spectrum Turing test passage computation.
So, I mean, could we just say that the techno-capital singularity would be the self-realization of the invisible hand of the market? You see a trajectory from like that basic level.
Yes, if you're doing it, if you're running your arrow of time in that direction, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to, we were naturally moving in the direction of talking about your theory of time, and it keeps kind of wanting to go in that direction, but I don't want to get away from this door you kind of open by bringing in inefficiency and asking what's our benchmark for what counts as inefficiency. And I think this is probably going to be the biggest sort of difference between us and you. And so it's worth like kind of looking at for at least a minute. And I know Mikey's probably got stuff to say about this, but I'll just kind of say it this way. It starts out with, I forget who said it, but there's that saying, I'm not so impressed by the fact that there's an Albert Einstein. I'm concerned about the fact that there's a lot of Albert Einsteins that never got to kind of develop because of the fact that they were probably down in the mines or working in sugarcane fields. And that's, for us, obviously, as humans with our anthro concerns, right? Like that's going to be, for me, the standard of what counts as inefficiency at a certain level, which is human potential. I care about it, and so maybe, and I think probably to you or at least to your younger self, and definitely for a lot of the people who are enjoyers of your work, it's just cute. Right? This concern of mine, this priority, it's a cute little thing that I care about, human potential. But where I come from, people are dying from opioid addiction. People they don't see anything else to do with their garbage time. except for drink alcohol and like it's the homes and communities, but also the individual level. It's all falling into dysfunction, and that is a result of the structural stultification of our life worlds because of the collapse of time energy, which is large energy infused repeatable blocks of reliable time in your week or month between people, right? All of that collapsed into individuals doing everything they can to prepare themselves to go back to work or to get a job. And so all of this effort, all of this potentially creative energy is being put towards our reduction to a kind of labor power and effort to do certain kinds of labor that are about surplus value valorization.
Right.
And so that's, I mean, there's potential here.
Yeah.
And so like this sort of Renaissance human, maybe that kind of humanism we should just accept. We're so far past that. But then there is the potential for some other kind of Renaissance. We're interested in what that kind of Renaissance would look like, but it's definitely one where people would have the time energy for discovering and cultivating their talents and relationships, just because we care about not having miserable, shitty lives in our limited span of time on this earth.
Yeah. Well, here, let me kind of take you back through that discussion, because I think there's lots of interesting elements to it. And maybe the first place to kind of stop again on this is potential. So your initial example of this is like Einstein's down the mines, and it's very inefficient to on any level. You can, there's a whole spectrum from looking at this in a very kind of humanistic, caring way that you're saying could be derided by the more cold-blooded as being cute, but you can get very cold-blooded about it as well. I mean, you can be very cold-blooded and see it as a huge waste to have someone with Einstein level capabilities working down a mine as a coal miner, and obviously, to go back a little bit to like the Jacquard loom and these kind of things. I mean, there's an implicit thing in all of that, all of those stages, that is saying it's a waste to have anything but a machine doing this task. I mean, this is something that a machine could do. It's like, why do we have a person doing it? And as I say, I'm not trying to pretend that this is particularly like based on any great humanistic sense of empathy or anything like that. I think it's just cold efficiency. And so if we're talking about potential, I think the question is this potential of a kind that makes sense to the capitalist mechanism, or is it some kind of potential that the capitalist mechanism just does not recognize? And I guess my stance is like, we might think we can find some kind of recognition of potential that outdoes what capitalism is able to do in terms of recognition of potential. I'm skeptical. I think capitalism is extraordinarily good at appreciating potential, and putting people to their most profitable use, and even in things that would seem extremely like far removed from grad grind type capitalism in the entertainment, music, artistic talent, musical talent, things that are very far removed from what might be seen as kind of just industrial potential. It's capitalism does a serious job at trying to sieve out this talent, this potential, and the only way it sifts it out is by commercializing it. So yeah, I mean, I should probably let you come back to that. But I guess what I'm saying is like wastage of potential is, I think, only something capitalism can be accused of if the notion of potential is for some reason intrinsically inaccessible to the economic, uh, to the commercial mechanism, commercial. I'm trying to avoid saying the economic logic because I kind of really have a personal aversion to using logic in this way, but that's kind of what I'm saying. I mean, if you can't uh, come to some commercial estimation of potential, then yes, indeed, you're then open to say that there is a kind of inherent wastage and inefficiency in capitalism that it can't address because it can only use commercialism as a sensory system. It's just intrinsically impervious to anything that doesn't make commercial sense or register commercially. But how restrictive is that actually?
Yeah.
Is it really that there's a lot of things that we value that simply cannot be, that no commercial sense can be made of them at all? I'm a skeptic, as I say.
So I definitely want to kick it over to Mikey here because I know he's got a lot on this, but I at least want to say, from a sort of knee jerk response without having put a lot of thought into it yet, the need to commercialize something in order to show that it is indeed, that there's actual potential there is that's what's driving what we call education today and the institutions that do what we call education today, right?
I don't know, is that right?
You don't know if that's right?
All the kind of libertarian right people I know are in absolute despair about education.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's precisely because it doesn't seem to be doing that at all. It seems to be just doing left-wing political indoctrination.
For sure.
I mean,
but I'm not talking about the social sciences or humanities. I'm talking about the physics research and the maths and the engineering, which is being driven by weapons manufacture, research, and advertising. Like the funding that you have to find. Where does the funding come from? Does it come from the government has said, oh yes, we want to fund science for objective truth. We care about that. No, they don't care about that, right? It's about the...
Well, I mean, if they don't, a lot of that stuff still seems to be done. I mean, physics has its problems, that are very interesting, and obviously we could go into that, but it doesn't seem to me the problems are coming from the fact that there's a social unwillingness to fund pure physics, let alone maths. I mean, is it the case there's any sort of constrictive pressure on maths education at a high level? I mean, I would need some convincing that is really something that's happening. It just seems to me that maths is so open to commercial perceptiveness, like that capitalism really, as soon as it understood anything, it was understood the value of math. It basically began in Renaissance Italy with a recognition of the just incredible revolutionary importance of the new numerals, of algebra, of spoon calculus. I mean, so yeah.
I
Again,
guess
I have some skepticism about this.
I will have to do some heavy lifting then, probably not just to convince you, but to actually just write out a piece maybe that could even lay out the case that I mean, my assessment of the situation is that the potential math genius and engineering prowess is going towards seeing how much skinnier we can make the next Big Mac while selling it for more, as opposed to anything else, really, Yeah.
But you see, to me, that's a very interesting criticism, because I think the thing about capitalism is like, okay, just hypothetically grant it an existence as an alien entity that's impacting this planet and putting itself together in a hostile environment. We are that hostile environment.
Right.
You know, humans, like, Deleuze and Guattari, lots of people have made this point that basic human societies have been organized to prevent this thing getting in, you know, and it required very specific historical circumstances to break through those security mechanisms. So it has to work with us. It's not going to, capitalism can't arrive on the scene in Renaissance Italy and say, look, what I want is basically all human activity to be directed in the long-term goal of producing synthetic superintelligences. You know, we're not interested in that. We say, I know we want hamburgers, you know, we want commercial sex, we want all this shit. I mean, sometimes we want good stuff, but, you know, or it's not capitalism telling us you want hamburgers. We're telling capitalism we want hamburgers. And so the only way it gets to do its stuff, which is basically swapping out human labor and producing increasingly sophisticated mechanical intelligence. So the only way it gets to do that is by pandering to us. You know, we're saying we want better weapons, we want hamburgers, we want all this stuff, you know, and it's simply, that's the environment in which it has to operate, to do its thing. But its thing is not that. You know, it doesn't, I can really assure you that, like, in its essential mechanism, capitalism does not give a shit about hamburgers.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's like, it's a concession to
But
us.
also
to develop.
But it's the us or we in that paragraph that I want to problematize, because which part of us is it able to appeal to? It's able to appeal to that part of us who, when we're in a hurry and we say it's good enough, we go for the thing that is really fatty and tasty, but it's not the part about us that cares about the long term, and it's not the part of you or me that's able to, like, read Kant or practice the violin. And so you can commercialize the sale of the violin or the sale of the lessons for the violin, but you cannot commercialize the actual doing it part. The doing it part's the part that can't be commercialized, and therefore we're not able to cultivate those higher human capacities. Right.
Well, I don't know. I mean, insofar as those high human capacities exist, which of course they do, it seems to me they're being catered to. I mean, you know, there are concert halls, there's orchestras, there's music sales. You can be a professional musician. You can be a professional musician because things are arranged that the market mechanism finds that there's a sufficient demand for the production of music that it can make commercial sense to pay musicians to allow them to spend their lives training to become better musicians, to group them together into orchestras, to, you know, I mean, those are things that happen. So it's not as if there's some process of erasure taking place where none of that stuff happens. You know, there's an art market, there's a musical market, there's a market for literature. None of these things are disappearing. Are they?
Are they? I mean, are they? I mean, are they there? Are they there? Or are they there? That's kind of the question. It's like the person who wants to do music because they want to live in a state of skole, if they want to have their leisure time and they want to have their, like, leisure time free of like pressures and stresses and just literally just live and breathe music, versus a person who's training to be a professional musician, like they're like a Korean going into, like, K-pop, you know what I mean? Like, where they're just being worked to death just so that they can succeed in that environment. It's a different quality of life, and of the product itself is a different quality of music. And then it's like, that might work for somebody who doesn't really, they're not, it gets them through the day.
We get both. Haven't we got both now? I mean, of course, you know, there's a much larger commercial market for various types of pop music, and people can be more or less cynical about that. But there's still every type of music, isn't there? There's still people who are completely vocational musicians, go to a high music school, become a virtuoso violinist, join an orchestra, and that's a completely viable thing for a small number of people. And the number of people that can be kind of the capacity for those people is ultimately based on what is the market. You take everyone on earth, what are their desires and inclinations. There's quite a lot of high stuff, and that stuff will be catered to. So I mean, obviously the other side of this question is, like, what is there really any imaginable institution that could do a better job of this? Like, you have some sense of what is really valuable and important and what people should be encouraged to do and help to do and all of this thing. And is there any imaginable institution that you could trust to maintain a set of values about this that you would respect, and therefore support those things? Because the things we've tried to do that with is democratic governments. I mean, we've got let the government decide. I mean, does the government make trustworthy decisions about what part of human aspiration is worth encouragement? Certainly, I don't believe that is true. And so if it's not the government, I mean, maybe you're saying there is some kind of government that would do it, but if it's not the government, it's not the market, what is it? Like, where is this institution going to come from?
Right now, I'll just say that for me, the way that science and technology being sort of unleashed majorly, like in the Renaissance, really has its. I mean, I think it's kind of spelled out really well by René Descartes in his the Discourse on Method, right? And he's saying, hey guys, if we unchain this thing, we could like make a lot of labor-saving devices. He says an infinity of labor-saving devices. And then he says, we'll have so much more time. And then he says, our workers could do this and that and the other. And so, of course, there's this we here, and the class question rears its neck.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, but like, are those labor-saving devices for people, or are those labor-saving devices for the small number of people who've had the time to get to know their desires and inclinations so that they can appreciate things that aren't the cheeseburgers and pop? And so I mean, I want to cash in on the promise, obviously, and that's a humanist desire, and I get that. But
Yeah.
the point is like, well, it does say these devices do save labor in a certain sense, but when they're being done for capital in the way that they are, that certain sense is one where a lot of this potential is lost. So then, and it's like, I don't care about this abstractly. I care about this because it's just like, I care about the people I care about. I care about myself. I care about like being able to do the things that we want to be able to do. So that's where I'm coming from. I kind of want to just leave it there.
Yeah.
And because I
Okay,
feel like
can I just bring one thing back to this, though, which is
for
just
sure
whether you follow Jehu's stuff. That
Jehu.
that communism is free time and nothing else position. I mean, you might be interested in it. It's like, I have obviously problems with it. I mean, he's a full-bore communist, but he's a very interesting one.
What's his name?
And Jehu, his Twitter handle is Dan_Jehu.
Okay.
And yeah, a super interesting guy.
But you got problems with it, yeah.
I mean, as I say, I won't. There's no need for me to get into a whole complicated thing about my agreements and disagreements with him. But
For sure.
he seems to address your concerns more intensely than anyone I can think of.
Well, just as in case I'm being put in a bucket of deplorables I don't want to be associated with, I look forward to meeting Jehu and finding out what he thinks. But I do want to clarify, I'm not a communist. I don't care about a classless society. I have no
No, sorry,
interest in.
I'm not trying to
Yeah.
do that at all.
Okay.
I mean, I'm
Okay.
just saying, his whole thing is that he embraces accelerationism, but he says, the fundamental dynamic of it, he embraces a kind of 1990s anti-humanist accelerationism, but he says, the basic logic of the system is to just replace people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what should be embraced. So he's a kind of Marxist who basically says, look, the whole thing is that this capitalist mechanism is basically about pushing people out of industrial activity, and that the whole attention of what he sees as his politics is to embrace that and say, that basically the capitalism should just become our bitch. It should totally replace us as industrial units. And then, I mean, for me, Marx gets a bit cringe with the whole fishing in the afternoon and stuff. I mean, I don't know, but he doesn't get that cringe. I think
Jehu
he's sort of
doesn't.
in the same place. Yeah, damn Jehu doesn't. He's much less subject to these slightly kind of weird, I would say, Victorian kind of, romantic images. But obviously, in terms of substance, it's all about the production of free time, and that he thinks that all other, I guess he would say leftist. I mean, I don't. It's people use this language tactically and in different ways, but let me just pretend that he would say leftist. All leftist political activity should just be about free time maximization, and that in doing that, it's in some kind of deep accord with the fundamental historical capitalist dynamic. So yeah, that's why I said I thought it resonated with the points you were making, and not to accuse you of some kind of.
Well, and I don't part of it's not just like, oh, communism has a bad record or whatever. It's no, that I just literally do not believe that the state is necessarily the solution, right? And that you casting doubt on that, I think, is a good point. And it's actually a good point that the Austrian economists do bring in, is like, yeah, centralization and state control and this top-down governance of economy, that's not necessarily going to get the results that people are looking for. Maybe it can. I'm open to that. I'm agnostic, but I am very skeptical, right? And I think like there's nothing worse than a government that is ruling over people who aren't skeptical of it, right? I mean, nowadays you're supposed to be shamed for that, but I've got no shame. I agree with you. So, but with that, Mikey, what do you have on all this?
I mean, there's a lot to say. I mean, look, I guess for you, Nick, like I kind of want to give you more context. Like, I guess where we're coming from is obviously we take Marx seriously. We take you seriously. We take Baudrillard seriously. We take Mark Fisher seriously. It's like we're living among all of you, like these different thought spaces. And obviously, the leftists who love what we're doing and support us, some of them they're like, oh, land, but we see something essential in your work where you're like, no, you can't just brush land and CCRU and accelerationism under the rug. I think what you did with thinking through artificial intelligence, using D&G, especially what they were doing in Anti-Oedipus, there's so much that I agree with there that I'm always having to think in terms of your work when it comes to how I think about capitalism. I think you're one of the great theorists of capitalism. And so if I want to understand capitalism, you're going to be there at the heart of whatever I'm thinking through. So where I'm at is I'm always caught up in a web of tensions, right? So on the one hand, I see the thing that D&G saw in capitalism, that it decodes, it deterritorializes. Well, I embrace that. I don't want to live in these old local codes or imperial codes that they were talking about. I celebrate capitalism in the sense of how it can uproot, how it can deterritorialize, and so I'm with you on that. But then there's the lived reality. Like, I'm not a professional academic. I'm a wage worker. I work in a warehouse. And this is where, like, the more the Mark Fisher stuff and the Baudrillard stuff resonates with me, because a life of shitty wage labor, it's like the great nihilism, the real concrete nihilism, where you get up and you go to a job you hate, and it's just meaningless. And why we're so big about time energy is we see it as the transcendental condition of the good life, or the pursuit of the good life. And wage labor traps you in this situation where you're at a job 8 to 10 hours a day, you hate being there. Once you leave, you don't really have the time or the energy to devote to things that you love. And so, yeah, like, if we're leftists, if people want to talk like that, it's in the sense that we do want to see the emancipation of time energy. Now, I know I say that to you, and I mean, one of your famous comments when you were talking to Justin Murphy is, you're not interested in emancipating human beings or human groups. And I respect you for just saying that, because most motherfuckers would just, oh, I'm not saying that. No, I get that. But this is the tension I'm caught in, where I do see that capitalism does things that I like, but the wage labor thing is the part of it I don't like so much. And to bring this back around, the reason I said all this is, I'm almost, you famously say, this is in Fang Numina from Machinic Desire. You said, for every problem, there is a virtual market solution. So the question is, instead of thinking outside of capitalism for time energy, uh, is capitalism what could actually provide time energy through automation, through the withering away of wage labor? I mean, is it possible to have capitalism without wage labor?
Um, yeah, it's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. I mean, I,
Basically, do you
yeah,
believe that
I was
capitalism,
trying to
like
think what's the best way to get an angle on this
is the only way
answer.
that capitalism can produce surplus value through human labor power? I mean, this has always been the standard Marxist view of where
Yeah,
value is produced. But I've also seen you talk about capital when you were
yeah.
talking to James Ellis on Hermetics, right? You said, capitalism really is doing anything cyber positively. Like, capital is uh, this ability to just do something with greater and greater returns, greater efficiency. And so I don't know if that means that capital accumulation necessarily has to always involve human labor power in order for capital to continue. I wonder if it's possible to actually think um, capital without human labor power.
Yeah, I think, yeah, look, this is a really good and interesting question. I mean, maybe the first place that I have to sort of intervene is just to say, you know, I've learned a lot from Marx, and I have enormous respect for a lot of what he's done. And, you know, I would say for me, he has to be read within a larger Austrian framework. Um, I think what Schumpeter's criticisms are really sort of irresistible. I think that the transformation problem is absolutely lethal to a kind of naive notion of um, Marx. And I think there is a sense in which the truest reading of the whole massive exercise of Das Kapital is as a reductio ad absurdum of the labor theory of value, which is obviously something Marx inherited, not uh, So there's all those caveats, and as part of that caveat, I do not believe that um, th- th- saying that the capitalist mechanism, the surplus value, is entirely based upon it's based, sorry, to say that profitability of capitalist activities is totally based on surplus labor power is an accounting trick. You know, it's like you can definitely do that accounting, but that's not to say, but you're not really doing a kind of causal explanation of why that's happening. Because of the fact that capitalism is bringing a lot to the table that disappears into that accounting trick. I mean, it's doing the organizing, it's doing all kinds of stuff, and then, you know, it inserts human labor power in, and the human labor power is totally used as the unit of account for what is actually happening in that thing. And you guys must know from your own work that that's true. I mean, it's a very convenient accounting device to say, look, there's fixed capital that comes in, and that just simply, you know, is a cost of business, and then we are doing everything. And so you make sense of the whole economics of the company by like looking at how much we're being paid, how much the company is doing, discount for fixed capital, and that's the business structure. I mean, of course, that's like a nice way to talk about it, but I mean, do you seriously think that's what's happening there? You know, and it's like all the value is being input by the fact that you are, you know, the labor force in that thing is doing the work. I mean, that seems to me like weird. Like, you know, obviously Austrians go to the other side and say, look, all the real surplus value comes from sort of entrepreneurial input. There's, you know, there's a business idea, they put the organization in, they hire the labor at competitive rates, and then if the entrepreneurial idea is great, it will make money, and, you know, the entrepreneur is the hero of profit. I mean, that's also very one-sided. I don't think it's more one-sided. I think it's like clearly as credible a story about where profit actually comes from in a business. And certainly if work is kind of routinized and involves little initiative, just micro levels of initiative, but on a level that, as Marx always likes to do, kind of just averages out, then it's hard to see how that competes with the sort of entrepreneurial contribution in terms of making a business sort of distinctively profitable and functional in a competitive economy. So, okay, this is my sort of right wingery to your left wingery on that point.
Yeah.
But the deeper issue is this: that, yeah. So can you have capitalism without wage labor? And it's a seriously interesting, complicated question, and it's ineliminable from a question that takes us back. The Turing test takes us back to artificial intelligence, takes us back to our social relations with machines, because the special status of wage labor comes from the fact that humans have political rights. You know, they have property rights over their own labor. And so the fact that they treated as a special category by Marx, as we've just seen, by themselves, no doubt, also is because they are the people disposing of their own labor power as their own private property. So, you know, you've got a contract with your business where what you own, your own capacity to put in whatever hours a week of work for them, is something that you can freely dispose of, and therefore you get compensated for in your relationship with your employer. Obviously, you know, if nothing else ever occupied that role, then it's hard to see how you could have a capitalist system. Like if it was to be the case that humans are the only beings that are ever able to have this self-ownership, rights of self-ownership that gives them the special status to enter into these contracts with capital via an employer, then they would, then I mean, you're faced with this peculiar thing about fixed capital. You know, like if fixed capital, all the machinery that you could buy, say you've got artificial intelligence LLM, say you can run a business that actually doesn't need any human employees whatsoever, and it's all fixed capital. And so you just sack everyone and replace them with machines, and every single thing from top to bottom of a company, except for the ownership, is being automated. Is that a capitalist enterprise? You know, again, we're getting back into the damn Yahoo's territory, because this is very much his sort of model.
So, but
His model is based on the fact that that these rights don't ever get distributed to any non-human subjects. So yeah.
So I mean, but here's imagine you're in the position of power, and okay, the vast majority of the economy has been automated, and yet the economy is still, it's still got private ownership, so there's still capitalists, but the vast majority of the infrastructure and the production process is automated. What do we do? Like, do we have the state just do UBI, or like how do we get the problem of how do we solve the problem of how do people have money to buy what the capitalists sell us if nobody has jobs because everything's been automated?
Yeah, it's obviously, well, the UBI example is really important. I mean, this is obviously how some people are thinking about it, for sure. And that's in this it's very, the whole, I guess, of left accelerationism is very sympathetic to these
Cernacek and
sort of
Williams and inventing the future. Yeah, they're all about it.
I mean,
but as somebody on the right, or somebody who's profoundly pro capital, I mean, there's a sense where it's like, okay, if there's no one to buy this, I mean, it's like, do the capitalists, wouldn't they have to tell the state, like, or would I mean, there's nobody to employ. I mean, do you pay them do you employ people as consumers? Like, here, we're paying you to buy stuff that we produce. It seems like the only way, because the capitalists aren't going to want to do that. They're going to want the state to just provide UBI so people can buy commodities. And so it seems, but
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, this is all super interesting. The reason that yeah, I mean, there's capitalists and there's capital and there's the workers,
right? Yeah.
And I guess there's the state, because a separate agent. Now, really hardcore capital, and by that I'm saying capital that is basically able to turn its own ownership into just automata that just follow the capitalist axiomatic. That's just, that dynamic that is just based upon MCM dash, that is just the absolute, just raw machinic expansion of the system itself, understood at a micro level. Now, what does that at the moment produces commodities for humans, because that's the way that, obviously in the whole sort of weird Marxist ecologist, it's got human workers. Humans are getting paid. The money that humans are being paid is the market, and capitalism panders to the market. So, there's a kind of organic connection between capitalism only has a motive to produce stuff that humans want because humans are workers. At a point where we've got this like UBI system, okay, the government then has money that it gives to people not to work, and capital can then try and get that money by producing things people want. But it's a much less direct and convincing circuit that we're dealing with at that point, because capital doesn't produce, like, back to our hamburgers, it's like it doesn't want to produce hamburgers, it wants to produce fixed capital. But the only way it can produce fixed capital is by selling people hamburgers. That's like, it panders to what humans want in order to develop itself, which is fixed capital. Fixed capital is what it wants. It wants social resources to be spent on, basically, in the wider sense, robotics. Robotics is the only thing capital, intrinsic core capital, thinks is at all important.
That goes back
All
to
the stuff it
right?
does for us is just in order to get robotics programs to work. That's the capitalist mechanism. So all of these kind of fixes are basically like, look, what is our coexistence with this machine that just wants to produce robotics, such that what's our niche in that? We've got a niche in it now. The niche in it now is we work for it. We work for it in order to produce commercial success for that system that produces resources that it can invest in fixed capital and therefore do robotics. I mean, that's the current capitalist ecology. And everyone's now moving forward into these futuristic, imaginary capitalist ecologies, the UBI thing, all of this free time communism, all of this stuff, in which you're just not in that ecosystem anymore. Humans are not in that loop. It's not that in pandering to humans, you're getting robotics out there. You're getting your robotics by some other company. The companies are just going to want to trade with each other, like for bits they need to put together better robots. That's the actual intrinsic capitalist dynamic there. Everything that they do to produce stuff humans want is just what they've been told to do that by politicians, by the state. Why would they want to do that?
There's several things here, and one that I want to touch on is you're saying, this was a little while ago, but I was listening. I think you said something like there would have to be a suitable replacement for what you said, like sort of contract havers sacrificing. You didn't use the term, but it does seem like if there's not something like stakes and loss and risk, if there's not individual units in that mass that are having to think, okay, it's either this or that, and I can't have both, and I have to give up in order to choose that. If that's not happening at the microscopic level, the intelligence factor is lost, and that development is undermined, right? And so it's like,
it's about trade. Like in the circuit, technology and commerce are the two sort of phases of the circuit. And labor power is based upon the fact that you trade with workers because they've got property rights, they've got self-ownership. And so, so you've got a contract with them. So there's a technological side, which is what you do for the company, which is like ultimately about building robots, however indirect. And you've got a commercial, contractual side, which is because you are a holder of rights of your own ownership. So you have a commercial relationship with them. And that's why there's wages passing to you from the employer. And all of these new thoughts, that are coming out of this kind of historical dynamic of human substitution are to do with losing that contractual commercial relationship, because you don't trade with your fixed capital. If some company brings in a bunch of robots, at the moment, they don't have to sign a contract with them. You know, they sign a contract with the company supplying them. So, you know, you need some chips from here and you need some software from here and whatever. And so you've got a bunch of commercial contracts with companies, but you don't have any commercial contracts with your actual fixed capital. The fixed capital is just simply your possession. It has no property rights. It's enveloped totally in your property rights as a company. And that's why it's completely different to having workers, and why suddenly we're thinking, well, what's capital without workers going to look like? Is blowing everyone's minds, you know, because it's like we don't have any framework for that at all. I mean, it's like no one has got a conception of what that would be like. And the UBI thing, which obviously is extremely relevant to that discussion, but it's basically saying that we just step right out of the dance, we step right out of the loop. It's like, you know, the government just gives people shit and companies are told they have to produce it for them. I mean, it's like that whole machinery, that whole, whether you like it or not, very kind of automatic, smooth machinery that goes between the technological and the commercial phases of the process is just broken. And you know, I mean, as theorists of UBI, we lose interest in what capitalism is doing. We just treat it as a kind of cash cow, as a golden goose that just produces shit for us. And how is that happening? We're not part of it anymore.
So I guess
understand.
So and I feel like one of the big complications is a complication from that there are two main traditions that we're kind of thinking between right now, and you were kind of touching on pros and cons of the Austrian approach, and that's basically like just my research. One of the main research threads that I have cut out for me over the next couple of years here, especially, is to kind of hone in on what are the strengths and limitations of this Marxian approach as opposed to this Austrian approach, and then are there other serious contenders on the scene right now that I'm not taking into account when I'm dealing with that? And I kind of want to touch on two things about that. And one is just to say, you keep saying fixed capital. For the Marxoids in the audience, we're just talking about constant capital, and I want to acknowledge all of their little red flags, because they're all thinking, well, value doesn't come from fixed capital or constant capital. Value only comes from variable capital. And of course, they're thinking that's because the fixed capital being improved through research and development that's the only source of value, only insofar as it helps valorize the relative or absolute forms of surplus value, right? Which is to say, because the fixed capital is more efficient, it replaces 100 workers with 10 workers who are now pulling levers, doing the work of all of those other people. So it's efficient and labor saving in that sense. But then they do weird stuff.
Can I just say, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but just to say, this is why I'm saying it's just accountancy. You know, if we have your model and you sort of sack 90% of your workers, and because you've got this cool fixed capital, then still in the Marxist accountancy, it's just that the labor's become massively more productive, and it's still all the surplus value is coming from your labor power. You know, the 10 workers who are left have just suddenly become, you know, 10 times as efficient. And in that whole Marxian accountancy, all the profitability of the company is down to those 10 heroic guys who are left. So so sorry to interrupt, but
and those 10 heroic guys are probably the I mean, they could be replaced by absolute morons in a lot of cases, right? Like I've worked at Amazon a lot, and the tendency is to make it so that anyone with a pulse is able to walk in there stoned off their ass and get the job done, right? And there's just so much wiggle room in terms of like the skills, because it doesn't actually take any skills. Those have been objectified, taken out of the humans, put into those machines. And it's amazing to see it, and I think it's very impressive. But where I was going with that was to say, I know that this traditional Marxist account is going to say, well, no, but value is only created here by this surplus value, and specifically through the variable capital. It's never through the fixed capital. And it's interesting how value becomes a problem for thinking about this. And I think you'd said that for the Austrians, they're going to say, well, no, actually the value is coming from these entrepreneurs. They bring something to it. So it's like Schumpeter as well. We could throw in as he's all about those entrepreneurs. And that's obviously an element that's missing in the Marxian account. They don't take it seriously enough, the sort of creative capacity that's brought to the table there. But I think they just bracket out value altogether and say there's only prices. Like we're not going to even talk about value. That's just this abstraction. That's just an abstraction serving Marxian goals. And we're going to bracket that out and just say that sounds like metaphysics. We're just going to deal with what we know, which is prices. And so we'll just focus on supply and demand and the sort of genius of this sort of objectified, depersonified intelligence apparatus. And I think that's all a valuable contribution. But I think one of the things that's lost in throwing out value here, and this is potential, this is for me, this is for research, and I kind of just want people to know where I'm coming from, is the Austrian response, through von Bauer saying, and I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but saying, the transformation problem, that's damning. And, then we have the labor theory of value, that's not going to cut it. Those two things right there, transformation problem and labor theory of value, are what thinkers like Pistone and Grossman and Michal Heinrich and Kojin Karatani have all transcended and have all thought inside out. And they do this 4D chess where they're like, no, it's not the labor theory of value. Marx he's doing a critique of the labor theory of value. Value form Marxism then is saying that the point is that it's the reduction of all things to the standard of socially necessary labor time that the world currently revolves around. But that's the problem. And the Leninist approach, the centralized top-down approach, was basically to mitigate the crises by basically using the state to make that more, I don't want to say efficient, but trying to mitigate those crises through centralization. But in doing so, replaces a lot of these booms and busts with this giant bureaucratic glut. And basically the intelligence factor that the Austrians are picking up on, that gets lost in there, right? And I think that Karatani and Heinrich and Pistone and even maybe Grossman, all of them are sidestepping that issue altogether by saying, no, it's this labor theory, instead of the labor theory of value being what Marx is doing, which makes him nothing but a miniature Ricardo, as Schumpeter says. No. He's doing this much greater thing, but Engels and Kautsky, they did not see what he was trying to do there. And obviously von Boerk and Mises and Hayek, they miss it as well. And so I don't know if that's all true. I'm trying to sort through it. It's very complicated. It's, you know what I mean? But that's kind of where I'm at and where I'm coming at this from. And so, I just wanted to say that. So I don't know what to do with that.
I'm just going to be literally 1 second. I have to.
Okay, cool. He can sprint. Did you see that?
He accelerated.
Yeah. I think now in my imagination, Land is always running that fast outside of Zoom calls. Yeah. That was very fast. Okay. Welcome back.
Yeah. I'm just getting some refreshment.
Good. Yeah. No. And if you need to take a break at some point, we can,
I'm cool.
Okay, great. All right, so I feel like this opens the door, and Nance had actually DM'd me a message about how we really should go into the theory of time, because what we're talking about is a difference in our difference in how we think about the human. It sounds like is largely based in maybe our differences in time, but also, Nance, you haven't said anything yet. So I want to give you a chance really quick here to say anything that you have on your mind based off of what we've said so far, or if you want to kind of take it in a direction for a second, let's let you do it. Yo, what's up, listener or viewer?
Yo, yo, yo.
How you doing?
So I noticed you sitting there watching this video.
Yep.
And yeah, you're listening, you're paying attention. You're definitely not hearing everything we're saying, though.
Yep. Nope, definitely not. You're not taking notes.
Yeah, take notes, dude. What are you doing?
Hey, you know what? If you want to if you want to be passive and just enjoy this content while multitasking, that's what we do as well. Everyone does that most of the time. We very rarely switch into this more active mode, and that's fine. That's fine because you're kind of absorbing this content as you go through your life, and that's great. But if you're going to do that, then we just have a little request of you. What's our little request, Nance?
We want you to do the algorithm things. We want you to hit the button, the thumbs up, or the thumbs down. Hit the subscribe button. You could even hit the bell so you get notified when there's an epic marathon stream.
Yep.
Or one of the dope ass interviews. We just finished a dope ass interview. But do the things to help train your algorithm to actually give you content that you prefer. And at least here we are aware of the problem. We are aware that we're all infected with the algorithm, and we're trying to do something about it. So while you can like maintain a cynical distance of like not being an enthusiastic vocal supporter,
right?
Doing those actions actually, first of all, it helps the channel. It helps Theory Underground. But it helps your algorithm too. You will get less kind of shitty clickbait react content if you train your algorithm to give you what you prefer. I mean, you're already here. You're already watching this.
Yeah.
So
enthusiastic, unironic, genuine support might be a little too much for some of you who are way too cool for that kind of thing. But you can at least hit the little like button, and then we'll say we're even, okay?
There we go. You owe us nothing now.
Yeah, let's get back to it.
So I think the question of intelligence and whether it's competence at playing games, I've always kind of called it just like ability to act in a goal-oriented manner on the world around you. And I think that rhymes really well with competence at playing games. And I know for me, it's very easy to conflate intelligence and subjectivity and the human, as it were. And I think there was a moment in the eons, where the ATP synthase motor was kind of this new assemblage, and it was kind of doing things, and there was this energy metabolism, and kind of over time, a subjectivity emerged from this assemblage that we have come to call the human. And I could just take that for granted and say my subjectivity, my humanness matters to me more than this kind of loose idea of intelligence. And then from there kind of say that's where I plant my flag. And I do think that's kind of at least my difference, because I don't disagree with anything you're saying. Like, in fact, I view capital as an alien invader. It's this god, and it is trying to compete for us for the resources, because it is also just a metabolism machine. Like, we're just the solar anus. We take in solar energy, we produce waste products. And I think, if anything, the only thing that, or the only difference is kind of the decision about that expenditure and what type of waste do we create. And I want to create human waste. I do want to create works of art. I do want to create private moments. I don't necessarily want to create efficiency. And I think that's why I can kind of accept and grant all you're saying and still just say, well, I'm a human supremacist then. I am, in fact, racist against robots. And I think that's kind of all I have to say about kind of intelligence and capital. Like, I think you're right. I do think you're right. and that leads me to kind of go into time. Like, okay, so then are we doomed? Like, have we come across this kind of point of no return? Have we already encountered our own, or have we kind of created our own demise in our machines and in the kind of external devices that have ossified and kind of become autonomous? Like it really is already this autonomous artificial general intelligence. It's just not that smart yet, but there will be a moment where subjectivity kind of emerges. And I think that's the singularity.
Yeah. I mean, look, the side of things that I think relates very strongly to what you're saying, and I'm not going to say puts a positive spin on things. Let me just take one step back before saying that, which is to say, like, you know, I do think there's a kind of obviously dark, very convincing construction of these things. You know, just as if I was just to say, look, everything we've just talked about, as far as I'm concerned, let's just say is purely descriptive. It's not like, I don't expect anyone to like it. It's the question is this actually what is happening? You know, but the context in which I think you get more sort of interesting things and which position us maybe a little bit differently are on the kind of deep cultural axis of Gnosticism. And, you know, in its modern form, simulation hypothesis type notions, which I think are very tied up with this whole retrochronic causality framework too. And if you're looking at things like that, then, you know, if once you're not positioning yourself in progressive time, like, you know, my ancestors crawled their way 3.5 billion years out of the slime, and now there's this what seems just explosive process towards the emergence of some post-biological superintelligence. It's hard to really think that we're not going to just be roadkill in that. I mean, it's, you know, it's like really why would things not look very dark on that? But if, on the contrary, you know, what has this thing, the singularity, the big threshold is something that has been crossed, and we are now in the kind of Gnostic space that is generated by that. Like, superintelligence isn't just like, it's not just something that is, you know, up the road on this on progressive time. It's something that is contextual for our limited subjective position. You know, we are immersed in and already in eternity, and by eternity I just mean a negative, outside secular history, consummated process of intelligence production. And I mean, you know, I'm sure there's more or less dark versions equally with that framing, but I don't think the dark versions is just like to do with sort of completely futile hopes of biological human competitiveness with this thing, or notions that somehow we're going to be able to just in perpetuity treat it as some kind of slaved automatism that is just going to look after us and allow us to kind of use our endless free time creatively and in self-fulfilling ways. I mean, those kind of framings just seem to me really hopeless. It's just like I just can't imagine how that could be imaginable. So But on the other hand, to the extent we're talking about something that's already happened, we've coped, you know. I mean, we're here or whatever. I mean, it's not, it's like we're all, that's the kind of framework. Like, okay, like, what are we really? Where are we really? When are we really? But like, here we are. It's not that there's some kind of just absolute annihilating negativity awaiting us that would be inconsistent with the fact that currently we actually exist and are having this conversation.
Nick, like, since we're talking about time, what everybody knows you as a Deleuze guitarian, especially in your 90s era, but there's a case to be made that the philosopher that's had the most influence on you is actually Kant. And, you know, early on, yeah, the Kant Capital prohibition of incest, you were critiquing him there. But then all these years later, when you were doing the Bitcoin stuff, Kantian time really was foundational to that. And so I guess I'm curious about, like, because I mean, in the Bitcoin book, you were making a very bold claim, right? Which is Bitcoin is, in a sense, the realization of Kantian time in a way that disproves, in some way, Einsteinian relativity. And so Kant got time right, Einstein got it wrong, or it wasn't enough. For you, what, for somebody who's new to philosophy and they want to understand what Kant was doing with time, how do you explain the Kantian theory of time that you apply in your own work?
Well, here I'm also going to do a little step back, just
Okay.
on the whole Bitcoin versus Einstein thing, which is very open to kind of ridiculous construction, and I'm not claiming to be innocent about that. I've come across someone who's put this, I think, much better than I have, because it's obviously not that Einsteinian physics is violated by Bitcoin. I mean, it's not that that Einstein is therefore falsified. What Bitcoin does, however, is it vindicates a Kantian as opposed to Einsteinian conception of time locally. So, because in Einsteinian time, there is no absolute succession. You know, what happens first between any two events is relative to the position of the observer, and there's no absolute priority possible. The blockchain absolutely requires strict succession, so therefore it's a Kantian as opposed to an Einsteinian time, and that is only possible because of the fact that cosmologically, the block processing rate is determined in a way that within the spatial extent of the system, it can guarantee a successive outcome. Like, sorry, I know I'm not being extremely articulate about this. Like, it's easier if you can think about it. Like, if you had Bitcoin extending across the solar system, which is what this other guy, and I forget, I'm sad that right now I can't give you the reference to, but he's interested in expanding blockchains across the solar system, and you can only do that by massively expanding the block processing time such that any signal can actually cross relativistic distances within that period. If that wasn't true, if you were processing blocks before light could get to whatever it is, Mars or Jupiter or whatever, then you couldn't have a blockchain anymore. It would be completely scrambled because you wouldn't any longer have absolute succession. So yeah, so all I'm saying is I'm not trying to make a physical disproof of Einsteinian relativity.
But it is
I'm
fun to
simply
kind of
saying,
say it that way.
I'm simply saying that you know, that the genius of the blockchain system is that it kind of fixes its block processing time in such a way that it can sustain absolute succession even in an Einsteinian universe. So it does produce Kantian time, well, and you know, you time. So in fact, what that means is you still have time, whereas obviously you lose time ultimately. Einstein, if you just pan out cosmologically fully with Einstein, you don't have time anymore. There's just space time. It's just a dimension. There's no true simultaneity or succession or all of these things. They all become relativistic. The blockchain practically finds the constraints on the spatial extent of the system such that absolute temporality can be instantiated. And so yes, I guess I say, it's been a while since I thought about it, but I guess I say that like the blockchain is the first time we really have had solidly instantiated absolute time.
And see, by absolute succession, what you're saying is blockchain functions as an absolute clock in the sense of you can determine what actually happened before and after, and you can chain a temporal link.
Yeah.
You can have an absolute foundation for temporal chains.
An absolute calendar maybe might
Yeah.
be slightly better, because it's not about the metric. It's about the order of succession. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so with Kant, and this kind of is a bigger question about your theory of time is acceleration, and like one of my favorite books of like all CCRU related stuff is Anna's Capitalism's.
Oh right, yeah.
Right, Transcendental Time Machine. And so stepping back, what I get from it is that, all right, so Kant had this idea that time and space are pure intuitions, that they're pure formal matrices through which sense data get filtered. And so for Kant, time is absolute because we all intersubjectively share the same temporal matrix. You as a Deleuze-Guattarian, though, so Kant's a transcendental idealist because this temporal matrix, along with the spatial one, they're forms of all of our intersubjective transcendental constitution. But D and G, they come with this idea of transcendental empiricism, transcendental materialism. And so in some sense, the transcendental conditions of experience are outside us. They're in the field of intensities. They're not just subjective forms. And so with all the stuff you guys, with using the distinction between eon and chronos, I guess I've always tried to figure out exactly how much of your theory of time is Kant, where does it become Deleuze-Guattarian, and is it best to think of it in terms of it's Kantian time, but it's outside of our subjective experience. It's not just a subjective form, and insofar as it's part of the virtual itself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very important reflexive complication comes in when you start thinking about time, especially when you start thinking about it a little anomalously, because of the fact that, you know, what if you have a sort of people are constitutionally predisposed to progressive temporality, and it's like it makes sense to us because memory is asymmetrical. If you don't, people use this thing about remembering the future in movies and such because it's an anomalous, bizarre thought. We can assume that conventionally and by ordinary experience and in every such way, memory is extremely asymmetric, and we remember the past and we don't remember the future. And therefore, it's tempting to think that stuff comes to us out of the past asymmetrically, and it doesn't come to us out of the future. Just to repeat, I mean, we're very predisposed to that prejudice, but obviously it doesn't remotely follow. I mean, there's no reason why the order of cognitive ingression should actually be the same as the order of memory at all. Memory is just the way that we represent certain things to ourselves. It's not some sort of raw perception of the way things actually impact. It wouldn't be memory, it would be perception if that was the case. So my strong sense of this is that like a certain humility is required when you're thinking about time, in the sense that you probably don't yet know why you think what you do about time. You would know, perhaps, if you had good memory, good powers of introspection, and time was just progressive. For sure, there's a chance that you would understand your own time intuitions in that case. But absent those particular assumptions, there's no reason at all to think that you will yet understand what you think, and about time in particular, because time is the axis upon which that uncertainty is distributed. So I guess what I'm saying first of all here is that I'm a bit unconvinced by arguments from influence or intellectual biography on this question, because I think that they are just like very easily just camouflage for something much more interesting. The notion that at point A you read this, at point B you read this, you learn this, and then you come to a certain conclusion about the way time works, is already a very particular and, to my mind, extremely problematic notion about how time works. I mean, I don't think Deleuze and Guattari think time works. I'm not sure what Kant thinks. Kant is obviously extremely ambivalent about time because of the role of the schematism. So time seems like a form of intuition at one point, but actually it's not, because the synthesis of inner and outer sense happens through time. So if time is just on one side of that, it can't fulfill that function. So time, he clearly says, doesn't actually satisfy the conditions of being an analog of space. And this is another reason to say there's something happening in Kant that isn't happening in Einstein. And I think what's happening in Kant is more interesting than what's happening in Einstein. And because there's something special about time that is utterly neglected by treating it as a fourth dimension.
Well, and wouldn't you say that part of the problem is whenever we start talking about time in terms of points in time, or even to say time is past, present, future, isn't that to fall victim to not seeing the ontological difference, like time as such, and then particular instances of time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and so like part of your work was always trying to emphasize like time is not a time. It's not a point in time. It's not a series of time. It's some we've got to keep this distinction between time as
Yeah,
such and empirical
it's
points
very
of time.
difficult to do that. It's very difficult to do that. It's the philosophical equivalent of the kind of burden of the mystic, to remain in a state of enlightenment. I mean, to not be just lost on the question of time is extremely difficult and maybe impossible. I mean, because of the fact that, if we're ever going to get time right, there's no reason to think that that's now. I mean, it's like, it's extremely obviously a lot of what's going on here is that there is kind of preparatory, anticipatory things happening at lots of levels, including the cognitive level, that happen to a level of adequacy that does not rise to full lucid comprehension. Things happen as much as they have to happen, rather than happening to a degree that fulfills our most expansive epistemological ambition. But I think what we can safely take from the tradition of transcendental philosophy is that, as just you say, time is not made out of bits of time, and time does not come out of the past. I mean, the huge temptation, if we just become inert, we always actually think time comes out of the past. But that just cannot be right. I mean, that I think that's Kant's great achievement. It's like it cannot possibly be right to think that time comes out of the past. And as soon as you say, okay, so time doesn't come out of the past, I think you're already in a realm of questions that are extremely stimulating and productive.
Right. And I mean, like phenomenologically, we think that the present moment is the realization of time. Whatever is that one present moment, then you get into the whole problem of how long is that present moment, even Husserl. It's like, no, it kind of drags up and then it has a lingering effect, and you can't even precisely mark the present moment. But it gets me thinking, like, what you're talking about is part of what I take from DNG, this distinction between actual and virtual and intensive, this threefold distinction. Um, if time is virtual, it's past or future, it's a
Yeah.
whole. Okay, I'm kind of fumbling at this, but Nance and I were talking before you came on, and it's almost like you and CCRU. It's like a block theory of time, but it's not static. It's not stable. It's dynamic. But basically, it's that time itself is virtual, and we want to reduce time to actual moments and not see it for the virtual wellspring that it is on this larger scale. And so, I mean, I guess to say, look, we actualize time opposed to seeing it as virtual is the same thing as saying we make a piece of time itself. It's the ontological mistake, or not seeing the ontological difference. But yeah, I mean, would you say that your theory of time is somewhat akin to a block theory of time, just one that's dynamic?
But when you say a block theory of time, you mean this again is like Einstein language?
Well, kind of more of like the past, the present, the future. They are all simultaneously real.
Yeah.
It's not like one's fake and the other ones are real. They're all
Yeah.
real, but we can't experience all of their reality at a single moment. And so it's kind of like
Sure.
it's a simple little example, but when I was trying to explain how I understand your theory of time to my students, I hold up a record. Like, okay, when you put on a record, yeah, you're hearing the song as it plays through where the needle's on the record, but the whole record's there. Just because you can't hear the whole
Yeah.
record at a single
Yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that's more of what I mean by a block theory of time, where it's all
Yeah,
there.
yeah. No, I would strongly endorse that for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Like, I mean, I think it's just in our tradition what is meant by eternity. You know, it's a privative term. It just is to say, you know, we're not saying anything positive about it, but what we're not saying when we say eternity is that time comes out of the past. You know, we're not saying that only the present is real. What we are positively saying is extremely challenging and maybe, depending on your vocabulary, mysterious. But for sure, there's a kind of shift from common perception that is required to even start thinking about what the problem of time is in the right way. And I agree with you. I think this is totally, you know, a really good way of formulating it. And I think it's also a very traditional way of formulating it. You know, I think all the sort of questions about providential structure of time are very, very commensurate with it, which is to say, history is coming out of eternity, it's not coming out of.
Mhm.
So, you know, you can look at events in that sense. It's like, you know, the lofty powers are not waiting to see what happens. You know, we're waiting to see what happens, but that's no way to start thinking about time, history, or any of these questions of any seriousness.
Mhm. Okay, so I kind of want to pivot into this other discussion here. This is when I was teaching my intro course to your work, some of the students, these were the questions that they were like, if you could ask Nick Land anything, what do you want to ask? Well, okay, so for some context, back when you did your interview with James Ellis on Hermetics, he had a thing. He always opened up the discussion by asking if you could have five philosophers in a room together,
Oh
what
yeah,
five would you have? Yeah, and of course, like with you, everybody's expecting you to just go. It would be Kant and Schopenhauer, Nietzsche,
Bataille.
Bataille, Deleuze, right? But you didn't say that. You said, well, actually, it would be the five syzygetic lemurs, the great lemurs. Uh, and you're like, I basically spent 20 years of my life locked inside a room with the five great lemurs. Nick, the question, what is a demon lemur and what does it mean to be locked inside of a room with five of them for 20 years?
Well, I mean, I think the point is with this stuff is that people, including myself, it's hard to stick with it. You know what I mean? It's like you need constant reminders. Like, so yeah, I mean, I would totally love to just, that would be my just kind of normal background level of cognitive operation, would be just being addressed by the lofty powers or whatever. I mean, but obviously you just lose the track, you just get distracted, and you know what that is as a problem again takes us back to this question about time, because the single most striking and sort of, to me, telling part of my sort of life, intellectual life, and then obviously it involves other people, because it's like the CCRU is this very, very core sort of bedrock of it, is how much you had no idea what was going on until later. You know, it's like you're very excited about something. You can totally see how you go forward with it. You can maybe produce texts about it, all of this kind of thing. And then decades later, this thing comes to you and it's like, oh my God, that was there already. You know, like that was in it. You know, we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, we just really just had no understanding of what we were doing. We just knew enough to move it forward, but we didn't understand what it was that was being moved forward or what it was really about. And to me, that is the most characteristic part of life as a human being on this planet. You know, it's like that to me is like if you're not processing what's really going on there, if you're not processing what it is to be doing something that you don't yet at all understand, without any sense you don't yet understand it, or any sense even that you will eventually realize that you don't yet understand it, if you don't see that, you're really lost in the matrix in a kind of absolutely serious way. So, you know, that's the level of these guys. That's the level to me of what is going on. And there is the fact that, you know, you don't yet know what you're doing.
So, but like,
is that kind of why you're saying though that attention is so important here, because you can lose the thread, you can fall off of it, keeping it in mind? Is kind of your point that we fall into taking time and this sort of this normal human perception kind of level at face value, that we kind of forget
it's kind of that, but you see, I mean, look, I'm not really doing this as a kind of confident mystic, in the sense, I'm not saying if you had the right practices, you could sort this out and you could kind of at least much better maintain in a state of elevated, attentive awareness of what is going on. I mean, it's not that I'm saying that's not possible, but my fundamental kind of experience of this is more that it's like it's part of what is going on, that where you are is where you have to be, not where you kind of would want to be in some kind of, you know, state of lucidity. I mean, it's like, it's just stuff comes to you when it has to come to you. You forget it when you don't need to remember it. It's like the agenda here is not your personal intellectual biography. Your personal intellectual biography is a footnote in this other thing, and that other thing is vastly more coherent than any conceivable intellectual biography that you're ever going to make of yourself. Right. And so that's, you know, that again seems to me to tie up with this big structure of assumption people have. Like, you know, everyone believes in intellectual biography. It's like everyone believes in it. I just really do not believe in it. It's just bullshit. I'm sorry. You know, it's an illusion. It's Maya. I mean, there is no intellectual fucking biography. It's like, you know, what is happening is something completely different that just can masquerade as intellectual biography. And, you know, so connecting with that at the times that it's necessary to connect with it is the thing. And that's going to come more from it than from you.
Okay, but like, so, but you got to realize too, like, I don't have a background with the occult. I'm interested in the occult insofar as you're interested in it and trying to see how it influenced your thought. But I mean, just the basic question of these 45 lemurs, I mean, is it a thing where, I guess the thing is, everybody basically thinks the occult that you were really influenced by was chaos magic, and that influenced how you thought about hyperstition. And it's not so much about the realities of spiritual entities, it's more about how the practices can change things and bring new potentials into actuality. But when it comes to the lemurs, nobody even seems to have an idea. Like, are these actual spirits to you? Like, are they real entities, or are they somehow mechanisms you use to change yourself, to change your perception?
Yeah, this is it. We're in exactly the same zone, and it's like it's the zone to be in for sure. It's totally fascinating because the thing is, like, what these things are to me really doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It matters a little bit in the sense of, like, the way I talk about them maybe will have some influence in ways that matter or whatever. But what matters is not what I think of them. It's what they are. And what they are, it's, I mean, what do we need to know about that yet? You know, obviously there's some massive level of camouflage going on in this whole thing. I mean, this is why I think, like, this, the Gnostic tradition is the crucial cultural tradition that is, like, philosophy adjacent and absolutely indispensable. Everything's disguised. Heraclitus says, you know, my translation of it, I prefer to the usual one. I don't want to say nature loves to hide. I want to say nature inclines to crypto. That's the Heraclitean thing. And 100% that's right. There's nothing I've got greater confidence about than this. So, you know, I mean, I think whatever happened when the numogram arrived, we had no idea what this thing was. I mean, it's like, oh, we thought it was cool. You know, I mean, I'm in awe of it. I mean, I'm in awe of it ever more. It's like, I think it's like, if you look at what the kind of traditional tree of life has had in the esoteric tradition, the numogram just kicks that thing's ass so hard that it's just comical. You know, it's an immense, and it got deposited on us as a CCRU, and we just drew the fucking thing, and then we worked with it a bit, and it's like, what we thought about it, what we learned from it is what's happening. You know, we looked at it, we thought about it, we tried to learn from it. We probably didn't learn very much from it. We learned a few things, you know, we got a few ideas from it, but it is huge. It's huge, and it's completely inexplicable by intellectual biography. There's nothing we saw, read, heard about there's no intellectual biography thing that leads you to the numogram. The numogram is coming straight out of eternity. We were, like, blessed enough for it to fall into our laps. What is it? You know, we've scarcely begun to understand. And it arrived, by the way, when most of the CCRU, by coincidence, not including me, but I was obviously a regular visitor, were living in Aleister Crowley's house.
Yeah, this is part of the legend. So that really did happen. You guys were really living.
That really happened. That really happened. And it's like, you know, there was just this fraction of awareness. Oh God, you know, we're sitting right in Aleister Crowley's house. I mean, that's not nothing, but it wasn't. But what do you make of that? You know, nothing, except just to say we should have treated it as a sign that, you know, destiny is in control. Like, there's much bigger things going on here than you understand. But whatever.
So I wanna, I know that Mike's got, like, this whole, like, little line of questioning on this, and I have to break in because I just really want to ask you this question. I know that in the CCRU reader, there's there are allusions to intelligence assets and such. And I just want to like ask you point blank, did someone from the CIA, or using that as a metonym for the broader just apparatus, the deep state, did someone from that give you the numogram?
No.
Okay. And then
No, I can answer that blankly.
Okay. So then you're describing this like it came out of a seance or something. Like you're all there at Aleister Crowley's house and then it gets deposited to you.
If you were trying to do it as empirical psychology, it would probably all look very boring. I mean, we were just like messing around with the decimal numerals and, hey, like this looks interesting. And you know what I mean? It really, there's nothing interestingly dramatic about its arrival at all. And I would love it if someone from a secret society had passed it over. And I mean, maybe there's some occult mechanism we're not grasping where that happened, but that there's no obvious way.
Okay. Well, and then the other part of that question, and I just don't want to dwell on it, but I just kind of do want to ask it though, is like, yeah, were you guys just memeing when you're talking about intelligence assets and stuff like this? Or did you over time discover that you indeed had fans in that world? Because I know that in that world, supposedly there's some people really into the occult. And so they could have thought that what you're doing was cool.
Yeah. I would say I would put this all in this category of not doing stuff that you've got no understanding of what you're doing. I mean, I think from my recollection of those times, it was all done very frivolously.
Okay.
There was one single episode that I can recall. Maybe there's others that eventually come back, but there's one that I do remember where I received a strange postcard from the Invisible College that was like some invitation to join that, whatever that is, you know? Which I just ignored it. I mean, I didn't do anything about it. But I obviously remembered it, but I did nothing. And I would say I'm as interested, at least, in that now as I have ever been in my life. But that is so totally in this category of the fact of this thing about you don't know what the hell's going on in your own life. And yeah.
Fair.
So, I mean, I guess my thing is like, that's why there is so much mystery around it. Like, basically everybody wants, like, okay, what are the lemurs? How do you use the numogram? How can you use the numogram in your day-to-day? Like, everybody, it's so shrouded in mystery with people that I think I know you're not the biggest fan of Lacan, but you use this Lacanian term. They want to make you the subject supposed to know. Like, you have all this knowledge stored away about what's really going on with all of it, and you've just never written it out or shared it. But
yeah,
to take you at your word, because I've heard you say it before, where you're like, I'm still trying to figure out what is going on with this. Where you're like, I don't have this like 900-page book written somewhere on the numogram where I explain how it all works.
Yeah.
But
no, that's really feel. Good, because, you know, frankly, like, I mean, I'm in a stage, I'm being extremely unproductive right now, and I've got things that I want to do, and they just like, it's hard to get them to coalesce. And it is very much this. It's very much this thing about like, a 900-page book on the numogram, how to frame that, what would be in it, all of this kind of stuff. You know, that's what I'm predominantly thinking about. And I kind of feel that it's like, it's, you know, we're back to this same thing I've been banging on about for the last half hour. So, I mean, I'm too locked in intellectual biography. Like, it's like, you know, if I was supposed to do this freaking book, it would be already done, you know? It's like, maybe I'm being impatient. Maybe it's whatever. I'm not getting the program, all of this kind of thing. But certainly to just like take it out of myself, it's like, I think this stuff arrives in pieces. And it's really hard for me not to think that the important pieces haven't arrived already. And they appear at the time that is strategically important for them to appear, not according to you remotely, but according to kind of historical imperatives way beyond your pay grade.
Mhm.
And you have to like recognize them and not treat it within this kind of system of metric productivity and progressive time. And it's like, oh, why aren't I doing this thing? I mean, that's what obviously everyone does. That's the particular form of this delusion in this framework, is to say, oh, like, if only I was being more disciplined about it, it would be here already. No, I mean, you being disciplined or undisciplined about it is itself something that's coming from somewhere else. We weren't being disciplined when the pneumogram dropped in our laps. I mean,
You
the
guys were
pneumogram
partying,
dropped in
right?
our
Like
laps
it was,
because that was the time for the pneumogram to drop in our laps.
yeah.
Commercial break. TUCon 2024 happening October 24th through 27th. It's 4 days of brain overstimulation. That's right. We're going to be talking about sci-fi philosophy, human futures, critical media theory, the question of post-politics, like all of it, psychoanalysis, phenomenology, structuralism, all of these various approaches. We're going to be getting into it. We're going to get in the deep end. If you're curious, if you want to attend, if you live in Boise, that's good for you. If you want to travel here, well, you can come. But if you would like to just join virtually, you will be able to attend it via Zoom. That's right. Register today. Thank you, and hope to see you there at TUCon.
Tight, yeah!
Well, I mean, but do you know? I mean, I'm sure you do. I mean, look, you have books being written. This is Time Sorcery by Vexus.
Yeah.
And the whole book is just an attempt to make sense of the lemurs and the pneumogram and all of that. So you have people,
Awesome.
occultists, who are working on this stuff on their own, so they're developing it. But I mean, like okay, like syzygies. Like, do you know like why that resonates? Like why is it important that out of the lemurs there's 5 that are syzygetic, and the significance of the twinning? What is that like for you now, just looking back? What is the significance of twinnings or syzygy?
I mean,
I
all of these questions are going to get kind of huge. So, I mean, I'll try not to get into it too much, but already in the kind of just classic CCIU epoch, a lot of the stuff we were doing was based on this Lemurian Atlantean dyad that was based on 2 different types of numerical twinning between, summing to 9, summing to 10. And that cuts across a whole kinds of things. The Atlantean one, fittingly, I guess we call it Atlantean, is in the Timaeus. Oh no, it's not the Timaeus. It's the whatever that is. Critias. It's the one that really gets into the Atlantean shit, and there's the 5 pairs of twins. So 5 pairs of twins. I think you're like reliably in the zone at that point already. I think that you actually need another. I think you need the 3rd one, which is like, that there's once you start using this way of thinking about things, like if you've got any decimal system, you just fold it, you know. And so like the 10 plagues, the 10 commandments, all of these decimal sets, you fold into a set of 5 twins. If you do that with the 10 commandments, 10 plagues, I'm not 100% convinced by yet, but 10 commandments really, like, clearly you start hitting pay dirt pretty quick. Like you can see that actually the 10 commandments is a set of 5 dyadic commandments that, you know, start making a lot more kind of much more suggestive sense when you do that. So yeah, so from the CCRU, from the beginning of the CCRU, really this was being used as a kind of just meta key for the construction of esoteric history. You know, the history of secret societies, the history of magical systems. And I've become, if anything, more convinced about that. I think these dyads, I think that, you know, the Atlantean dyads, 1928376446, whatever, 55, that's an incredibly important structure. That's a key that can really get you into a lot of the history of secret societies. But in terms of what, you know, final conclusions about it, I would be premature. I mean, I'm, you know, that's what I'm doing now, but I don't have anything to just roll right out.
Okay. Well, we can move on, Dave. But okay, one last. Since it is October, Halloween is approaching. We thought, would you play a round of Sub Decadence with us?
You know, we haven't done that for so long. You think that would work? I'm not
We
sure.
did it.
I've got it. Not only that, Nance, when he was in town, he gave me a pack of Cyberpunk playing cards.
Right.
So we can play one round and see what we get. I got the card.
Yeah, okay, but maybe I could recommend you do decadence rather than sub-decadence. Like the Lemurian thing, we were totally into, and I will go to my grave as a kind of Lemurian sympathizer, but I sort of feel in history we might have more to learn from the AOE than we do from these weird Lemurian cults. And you know, one of these like later successive things we haven't talked about yet, but after the numogram, the extremely simple but just massive thing that the CRU would access is what we call alphanumeric Kabbalah. So that's to say Kabbalistic system that just counts straight through, is in the same form as hexadecimal or whatever, but just extending it to the end of the letter sequence, base 36 system. And the architectonic order of the eschaton in alphanumeric Kabbalah is 666. Which, interestingly, the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit and alphanumeric Kabbalah is also 666. We had no hint that this was true. I mean, I don't even remember when I discovered, like not long ago. So it's like, yeah, I take it. Yeah, I think that the CCRU was just excessively condescendingly snide about the AOE. I mean, the AOE is like, no doubt, in many ways, sublimely evil, but they have a lot to teach us. So that's what I'm saying. Like,
well, I've got the card deck, but I have the card deck organized for Sub Decadence.
Okay, all right. Let's do this, but ignore everything I've just said. Let's just
So,
go for
I've got
something.
the card deck.
Nick,
Okay.
we can bring you back for the other game. Okay, we'll reorganize it later for the other game. All right.
All right, so set one, we got 4, 5, 9, 5, 9. Okay, flip over the first of the second set, we've got a 6. Nothing pairs with that. Well, I guess if we were playing decadence, we would, but this is sub-decadence. Then we got an 8, don't have a 1. We have a queen that pairs with the 9. Got an ace, which is 1 and 3. Okay, so we got one syzygy, which is 9 and 0. Okay, that scores positive. And then the other 4 in the top set, we deduct. So we take the 9 away, the -5, -5, -4. That is -14. All right, who is that in?
You don't know off the top of your head.
No, let's see.
Oh,
it's
it's
K-Tac.
embarrassing, but I don't.
It's K-Tac. It's 14.
Dude, it's K-Tac.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So okay, there.
Yeah, that's ominous. It has to be said. Yeah.
Was that the one we got when we were at your house, Mikey?
No, we got Takitix.
Takitix.
There's Tacitus. Okay. We
Yeah.
nicknamed Ticky Tax. Right.
But no, so
Well,
okay.
I mean, I have to confess that this is just not something that I do. Like
you don't sit around playing sub-decadence.
I spend a hell of a lot of time rummaging around in the new RAM, but I really don't play a lot of subdecadence.
Okay.
Nick,
Well,
maybe
thanks
that's
for doing this.
I mean, best of wishes to people. I mean, I really hope it comes up with share. And my strong conviction on this thing is that if you've got a channel that could imaginably produce communicative information, it will produce communicative information. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there just has to be the possibility that it can serve as a communication channel. And as long as that is fulfilled, and there's probably other conditions, but basically speaking, like, it doesn't matter. Use any channel. It's like, it's not for you to kind of have to work out the communications engineering. The communications engineering is their problem, like, let them deal with that shit. If you can grok it, they certainly can grok it. And like, yeah. So, I mean, it's just to say that despite the fact that I'm a kind of completely negligent about subdecans, I do have abstract confidence that someone who was not so negligent would get stuff out of it.
Yeah, because you seem like on Twitter, your main focus still seems to be alphanumeric Kabbalah and working with that. But so okay, when I sent this stuff to you on Twitter, that in alphanumeric Kabbalah, Land and Žižek and Theory Underground equals 666. Land and Žižek on the Theory Underground in 2025 equals 777. What does that say to you?
I would say, something, but not a lot in itself. I think lots of people are getting really good at this shit. I don't know whether you follow these accounts, but there's some people who are just like produce just incredible volumes of like extremely clean, interesting, persuasive, Kabbalistic results. So you're in a very competitive environment. So I think that this, as a culture, is still in a process of emergence. Like, there's criteria for what, at the moment, I think it's very much still personal in terms of what you find convincing and compelling and pushes you in a certain direction. I don't think that much has arisen yet in terms of, procedural criteria for how we're going to evaluate these kind of results and what sense we're going to make of them. And, like personally, if something seems a bit grammatically off, then I just it's gone, it's like, I mean, I might laugh at it. I might even fave it as a tweet, but it's not going to have any influence on me at all if someone has kind of twisted it out of the form of what sounds like a kind of smooth bit of English. But other people might differ from that. I mean, I'm not gonna, it's what I mean. I'm not wanting to be dictatorial about it.
Well, in a heavily competitive environment, though, all opinions are not created equal, and everybody's chances are not created equal, and we are better than most of them. And I think that we can prove it if we have to, but we don't want to, because that would be showmanship and that would be ridiculous. And so we're not going to go there. But just to say, we've been trying to get that set up for over 2 years, that conversation. And we got Žižek. It took us a long time to finally get him on. And then we had to introduce him to you as a name. And then he quickly wrote some takedown of you that was dismissive and, based loosely and probably primarily off of what Mikey had actually said about your work. And then we brought him back on for the 1 year anniversary of TU. And that was when we were like, yeah, so you said all that stuff about land. That was cool. Like, would you be willing to debate him? And he was like, yes, let's do it. And then we were like, all right. So then reach out to you. And then it's just been like trying to kind of make it happen. Now, that's not our primary goal here, obviously. Like, I think this.
I'm interested. I mean, do you really think it would be that interesting?
I have two reasons. Two reasons why.
Yeah, I do.
Before I hand it over to Mikey, 2 reasons. Because I was never a student of either of your guys' works. I was always into like Heidegger and Nietzsche and Marx and Levinas and all this other stuff that just wasn't hip and cool. And I was always kind of just like put out by the like art school kids who would get really into either of you guys. And so for me, I was just kind of like, I don't care, man. And then Mikey was like, no, but you should. And over the course of our friendship for the last 10 years here, it's like, no, he's convinced me that I should. And there's a lot of reasons that I could get into. I'm not going to right now. I'll hand it over to Mikey here. But I do want to say, I am the prophet of the fault line theory. No one else is talking about the fault line theory. And so I'll just say something about that for now and then hand it off. And that is just to say, people don't care about thinkers outside of ones that are directly relevant to either CCRU or the Slavonian school. Those two schools are the intellectual milieus that were doing interesting things in the 1990s. Cyber history starts basically in 1992. You are the two schools that are present at that time doing interesting things. Historical, dialectical, materialist analysis, but also just in some kind of Platonic sort of approach. We can lay out why these two schools have had those impacts. But you and him are the sort of, I don't want to say leaders, you're not, but you are the ones who are capable of having conversations with a wide variety of people in different spaces over time. The two of you have tracked this intellectual genesis that is in very interesting ways, sometimes overlapping, but in the most important ways, there are strong contradictions, deep contradictions, not the superficial political antagonisms people focus on. The internet scene, insofar as we find ourselves here today surrounded by people who like Hegel and Lacan, even Badiou, like the people that they like in juxtaposition to you guys or as some kind of like slippage. And it's easy to trace. It's easy to show. And I know you don't have any interest in the personal autobiography, and we don't care either. But there is like this interesting thing happening. And so it's like always like, I don't care really about the opinion of you guys so much as like what you guys will feed the churn when this conversation happens. You're going to feed the churn, and maybe it'll unlock your book. That's possible. I'm not going to say it's a promise. I don't know, but it could unlock.
No, it won't unlock my book. You're convincing up to that point, but that's not going to happen.
Okay.
No, Nick,
There's a bunch of people who I'm very interested in, who I've been invited to talk to, and that I've just not, because I'm basically very skeptical about conversation. I mean, like the person who could unlock my book, I'll tell you, is Brian, who also, I think is a lovely guy, super interesting, the kind of weird druid guy. I think that would be relevant to this. Look, come on. I mean, Žižek is not going to talk about secret societies in any way that's not just like absolute bullshit. We could maybe talk about this. We did more on this in the first hour or whatever than I thought was possible on kind of quasi-Marxist kind of discussion. Yeah, maybe that could happen. But I don't know. You don't think that just like leaving it just open might be better? I mean, you want some sort of resolution or something like that. I mean, I sort of suspect that we just end up playing games with each other, and it's like, yeah.
So here's the thing, right? Like for either one of you, the worst thing that could happen is you're like, well, that was a waste of 2 hours of my life. But it certainly doesn't hurt either one of you. What it does is there is this generation of younger thinkers who are profoundly influenced by both of you. And we're going to keep thinking in terms of CCRU. We're going to keep thinking in terms of the Ljubljana school. And yet there's these deeper philosophical, we would call them converdictions. Like, we don't want to debate. We don't want this to be like a debate. Oh, you go and then he goes. We don't want that shit. We want a discussion of the core fundamental differences. Not like you guys are going to pull off some synthesis. You're not. No. It's more of seeing how the fundamental differences in how you guys think about capitalism, how you think about being as such, because he's coming with Hegel and Lacan, you come with Kant, Nietzsche, D&G, and you guys are part of these long thought trajectories. And it's more of all of us, because we do, like, I know how you feel about Hegel. I know how he feels about Deleuze, but Deleuze and Hegel have influenced all of us. So we're still, each one of us, trying to sort through this stuff for ourselves. And so considering the impact you had as a Deleuze-Guattarian, what he's had as a Hegelian Lacanian, that's part of seeing this converdiction where you discuss the incompatibilities and all of that. And I mean, as far as stuff to talk about, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of overlap, even if you disagree on things. And so I wrote a little list. There are many similarities.
So let you remind me, what's your 2025 alphanumeric Kabbalah tweet again?
Yeah, let me get it. It says, Land and Žižek on the theory underground in 2025.
So maybe,
Okay.
I mean, let's just at least accept the possibility that the lofty powers are speaking to us.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not gonna rule it out. 2025 is a lot of space. I mean, if Žižek wants to do it, and like you say, it's fine. I'm greatly enjoying talking to you guys.
We're enjoying it too. And we hope you come back, because I mean, Nick, I'm not going to lie, I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but no, it's been great. And I know he wants to do it. I mean, he's been interested in accelerationism. And I know that when he released the article, you kind of were like, well, because his main criticism is accelerationism is too optimistic because it posits some sort of clear determinate end. and he thinks that we just cannot begin to determine an end. But you could just respond and say, no, I'm the one who's been talking about the wall across the future for so long, where just because I see this trajectory in AI doesn't mean like I'm saying this is inevitably how it's going to end. So I can see your counter response to that, And so, I mean, he's thought a lot about China. You've thought a lot about China. You've written books on how singularity and Shanghai and all that. There's the thing between Hegel and Deleuze. There's the difference in how you guys view capitalism. Both of you are critics of liberal democracy. Both of you are critics of the politically correct right or the politically correct left. And
both of you
stuff.
have takes on immigration that are not going to be palpable for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those points of similarity are also interesting to us. So that's what we would love to see, is just a conversation where the similarities and the differences come out.
I mean, look, this has happened. Honestly, I would be much more thankful to the lofty powers than to me for this happening. I'm totally glad it's happened. But as you know, like, I'm extremely difficult to get in contact with. I mean, so for sure, I'm not ruling anything out. And maybe I will analyze your tweet and its capitalistic excellence, and not that matters. It's a prophecy. It's like, is it going to happen? Let's see. Could be vindicated.
Cool.
If it does happen, that's what I'm going to start talking to him about. Like, what do you make of the fact that the alphanumeric Kabbalah has been utterly vindicated by this event happening in the first place?
Let's see what he says. I mean, you cracked us up when you were like, they don't. What do you say? They don't even know the Anglo-Elvish etymologies of the word God.
No, I won't bully him with that.
Well, and Mike, when we read that tweet to him, I think he mostly misunderstood what we were saying, but I think that he got the kernel of it, which was to say, oh, well, people are always saying that I'm too Eurocentric, and now they're saying I'm not Eurocentric enough. That's basically what he did.
Yeah, because
honestly, that's surplus value. That's pure surplus value. I mean, that tweet's totally about alphanumeric Kabbalah. It's like, you don't have to get into geopolitics. The geopolitics is just fallout from it. So yeah. But no, I won't bully him. I don't expect him to.
I don't think he'll bully you either. No. Yeah.
No.
All right. Well, okay. Do you guys have closing remarks? We'll close this out here in a sec.
Yeah, Nance?
I do real quick, if you'll indulge me, I guess. I want to take a moment. On our U.S. tour last year, was it? Or was it? I don't know.
Summer last
Within
year?
the last year.
Yeah.
We did a U.S. tour, and along the tour, we kind of generated the term hypostition in juxtaposition to hyperstition. And I guess I just want to take a moment to clarify. I take hyperstition as not just wishful thinking, but like genuinely contact with the future that kind of engenders an unconscious belief in you, and you have no choice but to act in accordance with this unconscious belief. And hypostition, it's kind of a profanation of this, where you're projecting something that you want to happen, but you lack conviction. And so you kind of self-sabotage, like your actions bring about the impossibility of whatever it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and not just lacking conviction, but it could also be other aspects of. But the point is that whatever you're doing to prefigure or bring into reality the thing,
it's counterproductive.
You're
It's standing in the way of the thing itself. But I think for me,
I think I've come across that before. Again, I'm sorry, I don't have enough clear recollection, but this thing about like a negative hyperstition is definitely a familiar thought, and definitely an interesting one. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, the words, it's not it's a joke, right? Hypo, hyper.
But
But
yeah, it was great.
like it really does have to do with that, like Congress with the future. Like a hyperstition, you kind of have no choice in it. Like you can't just say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if this happened? But it really is this kind of atemporal or retrochronic Congress. And
Yeah.
I guess I just want to clarify that, because a lot of people, I think, get hyperstition wrong. They just think it is some kind of wishful thinking.
No, it's definitely something. It's definitely productive. I mean, actually, Fisher was I don't want to get into intellectual biography, but like he was a huge driver. And the thing that he was really interested in is this voodoo death, where you just like purely by saying, the higher powers say you're going to die, as someone dies. And it's like, that's a kind of, I mean, it's a somewhat dark, but absolutely kind of, essential hyperstitional event. Like that, there's not, because of the fact the culture is a causal force. So the notion that like what you say and what happens are just unconnected, and then only connected by some epistemological thing that tracks what you say onto what happens, that's just totally naive. Like by saying something, you're intervening. That's a causal process, and that, and certain conditions can just obviously be self-fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely the hypostitional thing, and I totally accept that the hypostitional space is then opened. Yeah, you totally can say something that will prevent what you are expecting or wanting to happen. I mean, 100%. It's just got to be a possibility.
On this note, this volume that we're putting together, it's called Human Futures, and it's a collection of writings, some of which are theory fictions, others are more academic in their nature. Human Futures is going to be a response to the question if anything human will make it into the near future. And the quote that we're playing with, maybe kind of putting at the very beginning, from Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, is the one that says that the poetry of the 19th century's social revolution must come from the future, not the past. And he's making fun of the fact that they were rolling out all these old tropes and slogans and stuff from a previous revolution, and that it was just a joke. And he was saying, look, the genuine revolutions did borrow from previous traditions. They did have some of the costumes and slogans, but it wasn't like all that was there was the ghost of the past. There was also something that needed to be done, and they were doing the thing that needed to be done, and they were drawing some inspiration from that poetry of the past. And then he's just saying these future revolutions are going to require poetry from the future. And I just wanted to point out that I don't think there's anything maybe more hypostitional than people who care about large-scale structural change drawing so heavily from these kinds of often Marxist, but whatever kind of works where they're just recycling old slogans and old concepts like the labor theory of value, for instance, or what have you, to such a point where like they're not able to contend with what might be new in the current situation, much less map or somehow attract or somehow get into sort of dialogue with, or I don't know what the right metaphor is, but the future, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The future, it's dark, at least in the sense that it's completely obscure to us. And like you guys have said, like this basic point, like, how do you think, even if you're going to be a cynic, even if you're going to say like we're not like in final phase capitalism, how do you think of capitalism without variable capital? I mean, where do you even begin, or who is even saying that? Like unless extremely indirectly by just being some UBI ideologists. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah. And so the question of poetry, it's funny. And the last thing I was going to say about it is just that Marx, says that we need to, that philosophers have only tried to interpret the world. The point is to change it. The 11th thesis on Feuerbach. And then Žižek says it's, change. Maybe we tried too fast and now we need to invert the 11th thesis, which would be the time is to interpret again. And then, so there's a question of interpretation and then the question of poetry. And it just seems like with Hyperstition, what you guys have done, and speaking kind of broadly about the CCRU and everyone affiliated and just kind of what you've been doing now more recently might be a third way to poetry and interpretation. And you're finding some other way of brocking it.
Can I just say about this? I don't want to spin this up, but Hyperstition is the absolute example of an element of what the CCRU is doing that's totally gone feral. I don't think. I can't pretend to be faithfully tracking what all the CCRU fragments are doing, but I don't think anyone's talking about Hyperstition anymore. It's just like, this is like 20 years. It's been in the wild. People have been doing with it. I honestly can't even guess what it's doing now. Like, it's not I'm not criticizing by saying it's not a piece of vocabulary that I'm using. I'm just saying it's off the chain. I'm not pretending to control this or understand this or where it's going or whatever. It's on its own life now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And so it's not your thing you're doing right now, right? This is not your thing.
No, other people might say that, and they might be right, but that's not anything I'm saying, and it's not anything that I feel I'm being told to say, and that's not based on any disrespect for that notion. Cool. It's just to say it's free, it's gone wild, whatever. Good wishes to it. It's like, but absolutely it doesn't in any way describe some program that I'm consciously conforming to at this point. So yeah.
Dave, one more question for Nick. So Nick, did schizoanalysis die at the Olympics with Ray Gunn?
No, but I have to say, I thought that was among the most perfect tweets that have ever been done.
What did you think of that?
I don't think people should get attached to these labels. They really don't. I think it's like, if things are helpful to you, they're helpful to you. If they're not helpful to you, they're not helpful to you. But like, yeah, I think it deserves the disrespect just if it frees people's minds a little bit, which I think probably happened there.
Do you think Ray Gunn, was she successfully becoming a body without organs in that breakdancing?
Oh, that woman.
Yeah.
I can't possibly comment. You will find so much commentary on this that anything I can add will be insignificant.
It is funny that, up until she did her breakdancing, I would say you're the most famous deluso guitarian in the world, but now it's a breakdance.
No, I've been totally outstripped now. I admit that humbly.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, Nick, this has been great. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah. Okay, this was really good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Fantastic.
And then here is your reminder to check the link in the description for pre-sales on Mikey's book, Capital versus Timenergy. We would be remiss to not remind you, considering the fact that, as Lan said, pretty much anything we put on the internet, it's for surplus value, right? Yeah, well, in that sense, let's cash in. You want this book. It's the only thoroughgoing introduction to Lan's work that you can buy in book form. Not only that, you'll also get a crash course in so many other philosophers that are necessary for understanding his work, but also for understanding Žižek, or what it would mean to have a Žižekian critique of land, much less one from the standpoint of time energy theory, which is what we're all about here at Theory Underground. Thanks, everybody.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of a situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down Seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey Seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button. Subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people, Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god, it's just so awkward. Thank you, patrons. Okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons, thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys, just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You did so good. Thanks, guys.